everyone. Today we're gonna discuss about ethical AI investing in responsible and inclusive innovation. We have our world famous speaker, Madam Ali Rice, Mr. Rob Ender Lee, and Mr. David Smith. First, I would like to give chance, Madam Ali Rice. My first question for you: what does ethical AI mean in the context of inclusive innovations, and how can investors ensure their funding support these values?
As far as I'm concerned, ethical AI means that there's kind of a conscience attached to it, so that the consequences of whatever you do on it are kind of acceptable, and they're kind of there's an expectation that whatever you do is going to be, if a human had done it, it would be acceptable too. So I think there's kind of, and there's also a responsibility to, to the user, the end user, and the person that's kind of doing it to kind of achieve their goal or their objective in a way that they're kind of expecting. So I would say that kind of an ethical AI will achieve something that's kind of achieving the goal, but also within the kind of principles and values that you'd expect to achieve yourself. So I think it's kind of, the objective should be the same. So yeah. So for me, yeah, I think it's there's kind of guiding principles of the way that it's developed and the way it's used responsibly. So yeah, so everything's kind of acceptable and achieves or maybe goes beyond kind of expectations of what you do for yourself.
Thank you. My next question for Mr. Rob. What does the ethical AI mean in the context of inclusive innovations, and how can investors ensure their funding support these values?
Yeah, that was the same question that Ali was also addressing. So really, what you want to do with regard to ethical AI is the AI's focus and purpose and outcome are consistent with the ethical guidelines that you hold and that your company holds. So that means it's focused on making people better. It's focused first on helping the human race, advancing the human race, and in the context of a company, enhancing and helping your employees, customers, and as a secondary impact, your owners. When you move to unethical AI or AI where the end justifies the means, that would tend to be tactical. It's where a lot of AI effort is focused at the moment, on monetary gains to the exclusion of all else. So just the reduction in labor hours for its financial benefit, not for its human benefit. So you're not with unethical AI, you're not really worried about laying off people because you don't really care about the people. You only care about the monetary return. There was a Twilight Zone episode, one of the early ones going way back with Robbie the Robot, that kind of highlighted what could happen and the on the unethical path. And in this case, the owner of the company continued to automate, and he automated out his workers, he automated out his executive staff, he automated out his support staff, and at the end, he was the only one left working in the company. And then he was automated out, and the end result is the company made a ton of money, but everybody else was unemployed. And of course, if you do that at scale, there's nobody around to actually buy the goods that you're producing. It's a company that's benefiting no one, including the owners, because that's when everything collapses. So with ethical AI, you do care about the means, and while you are still focused on making money, you're not focused on making money to the exclusion of all else. Making sure investors making sure that the ethical concepts of the company supplying your AI solutions are in line with your own becomes very important. Because the companies that you're buying from are training that AI, and if they are unethical, then there's a good chance that the AI you're purchasing will behave unethically as well. And so at least we'll be laser focused on things that might cause secondary harm and major consequential damages.
Thank you. My next question for Mr. David Smith. How can investor ensure that AI project they fund are built with ethical framework from the group up, ground up?
Well, if you begin to look back at, as Ali kind of said, her definition of ethical AI and things, that investors play such a critical role in setting the conditions around the AI projects they're involved with and that they are developing. And one of the key things that investors can do is they have to ensure that ethical frameworks are in place from the start. And they need to influence these uh, ethical practices by how they apply their investments, their dollars, their mentorship, which usually comes with investors. Um, yeah, so first of all, they have to prioritize their investment with companies that have ethical principles. Uh, so they should review and fund organizations that have clear commitments to ethical AI. It needs to be in their different types of documents, the mission statements, their practices, their compliance with global standards, such as the EU AI regulations, IEEE, the ones that are coming to place here in North America, and others. And they want to look for teams of people that are experienced in addressing the biases that are there, the fairness and inclusion in their systems. Because most investors understand it's the people who make the difference. And they're investing more in the people than the companies, in particular with startups. They really need to, as an investor, evaluate the ethical practices during their due diligence. I know the form that I use for due diligence, I now have a section in there on AI and on compliance and certifications and ethical practices and the frameworks. So they need to understand is have the companies implemented or are they implementing processes such as audits to understand the biases in the data they're collecting and what processes they have in place to mitigate that bias. They need to have transparent documentation of their models. And this is something that today bothered me. OpenAI has announced that to get their products to market faster, they're cutting back on testing. One of the big things I believe for ethical practices in AI is you have to have rigorous testing and ways to mitigate their risk. But a couple more things from the investors in your question, Dr. Shreve, is that you need that the VCs, the investors, need to support a strong governance model. Uh, and one of the best practices we're seeing is there needs to be an AI advisory board or an AI ethics committee, and people assigned that as their main job responsibility. Uh, and these should be very diverse if it's a committee or a board. You need to promote, as an investor, early stakeholder engagement with a very diverse group of stakeholders at every stage of the development of these to ensure the ethical parts of AI is being followed and used there. I mentioned transparency. One of the things you need to do with transparency is, particularly if I'm a startup company or others, it's hard to put transparency in place. So you need to incentivize transparency. And what measures are there to eliminate bias, and how are those being compensated? How are systems safeguarded to prevent harm to populations where the bias exists? And finally, with like many things, investors need to invest in ongoing monitoring. Is how do you evaluate this? How do you monitor it to identify and address ethical issues over time? What you'll see with Dr. Sharif, most of the AI products that come out there, you discover more of these biases. You discover more of the places where the ethics and are not transparent and where there's errors in the data sets over time and not just on launch, not just in testing before launch. So it has to become an ongoing process. So, Dr. Sharif, I think that probably is my answer to your question.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Alidas. If you share few of your experience from UK about ethical AI, how UK practice ethical AIs, or how they implement the strategy in UK.
Okay, because to be honest, I don't know that much about AI, but I do. I have had experience using it recently because I was doing a commission, and I actually used AI to generate images so that I had references to use. And it's really interesting because when I gave it specific detail that I needed, a lot of that time it couldn't pull it together. So I think it's really interesting that what I was asking for. So one of them was a man falling through a curtain, and I think the thing is there was no image that it drew up. So I think one of the things that's really interesting is even though you'd think that that would be something that was relatively easy to generate, I'd probably go back to what my son says actually, that if there are no images that are exact to what you're looking for, it doesn't very easily put something together. So as an artist as well, there's lots of question marks over kind of copyright and who owns it, and whether they kind of take composite images from other people but don't give them the credit, which we've had discussions about before. So I think it's kind of that's where those images are drawn from and where the resource is, isn't is probably never known really, and it's very clever, but there are lots of question marks about, and it's not regulated either, and most of the apps that people use are free. So I guess if there's free apps and no one's regulating it, then no one knows. So I think there's lots of question marks and concerns really, as because it's obviously people are utilizing things that they didn't necessarily create. So yeah, but no, it's fascinating.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Rob, my next question for you: what mechanism can be put in the place to make AI innovation more inclusive, especially for underrepresented community and emerging economies?
Well, this is a common problem with companies and their customer base. And generally, the conventional wisdom is you want to have the same diversity in the company that you have in your customer base. So the diverse ideas and concepts make it through into the design process. Too often in technology companies, the staffing is all white male, and often all white older male, and the end result is they miss entire demographics of people, younger demographics from different diverse areas, and particularly women who aren't really a minority anymore, but are often treated as one. And so the end result is, as you're developing an AI, and these AIs are conversational and have to interact with people, if they don't get that kind of diversity in the development cycle, then things that irritate certain groups or make them feel like they're not included in the effort make it into the process, and the AI is not performant. It's kind of reminds me of when GPS came out in Germany. They put a woman's voice in the GPS, and not realizing that for whatever reason, the culture in Germany means you don't take advice from women, which is kind of bizarre, and some men wouldn't use it. I guess at the time, I don't recall whether women were using it or not. Maybe they weren't planning on driving, but the result of the study was, well, you have to have a man's voice in the GPS, otherwise men won't use it. And this was a system that was developed by men, which is kind of bizarre. So the result is you really have to have the kind of diversity in your development staff, particularly in your training staff, that you have in your customer base, so the products come out and are performant against that customer base. David brought up OpenAI, and they're cutting back on quality control, and this would be against that. I was in IBM in the storage division, and in my division one time, they popped through and said, okay, quality control is a redundant function. It slows down the development process, and they're only pointing out problems we already knew existed. So we're disbanding quality control and speeding products to market. Our product failure rate went right through the roof after that. In fact, everybody in my upline, and I resigned. Everybody in my upline was fired, as a result of an absolute collapse of what was one of the most profitable businesses in IBM Software Storage. And so it kind of showcases what can happen if you don't put in quality control and assure the products are coming out to the level of the customers. In IBM's case, in that example, it was people expected a high level of quality and they got crap. But in this particular example, with AI, which has to interoperate with people, now you get large swaths of people that just don't relate to the AI doesn't work with, and that the AI's decisions don't benefit. And so the end result is, from a perception of quality, this is, though on a different aspect, this is an aspect of meeting your specific needs as a group. The AIs are going to fail. And I believe this OpenAI move that David pointed out is going to cause catastrophic problems in an area where we've already had significant AI quality issues. DeepSeek was the only thing near term that came to market with a huge focus on quality, and that's what partially allowed it to outperform OpenAI's offering, ChatGPT. The response from OpenAI should have been to improve the quality of their offering, not improve the speed of the development. Because if your product's making mistakes, having it go faster is only going to create even more mistakes to a point that you can't mitigate them. And so you want to fix the problems, increase quality first, then increase speed, not increase speed at the penalty of at the disadvantage of quality. So yeah, it's a bad trend.
Thank you, Mr. David. My next question for you: where should we draw the line between innovation freedom and regulatory control in AI development?
Uh, well, let me just say one thing before I jump in there. I love Rob's comments going back to OpenAI, because it's actually caused me to use OpenAI less, as I've seen these things popping up, and I'm using other ones a lot more. Uh, I'm really impressed actually with XAI because of the fact of its transparency of showing you what it does. And I think it still has a way to go in some of its work, but its transparency of telling me exactly the sources it's looking at, telling me exactly where it's doing things, is part of what I think, Rob, the future of some of this ethical AI will be. And I love their streaming thing on the side of the pipeline for doing that. So sorry, but I thought, since this was a news piece, and that's a great example of the topic we're talking about today, Dr. Shreve. But how do we draw the line between the innovative freedom and the regulatory control? Is the question, I guess. And it's really a complex balancing act, because I want to say innovation. I'm going to also say speed to market is part of that, and the regulatory control. All are factors that push back against each other, and how it goes. On one side, excessive regulation, as we've seen in many industries, can stifle creativity and slow the technology progress. While on the other hand, insufficient uh, forethought and considerations of oversights can 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 risk harm, can risk infringing privacy, and we've seen in many places actually misuse what's there. So how do you balance this? You have to prioritize safety and ethics. Uh, and the very basic beginning of a lot of the industrial regulations, which was safety, that comes with AI as well, and ethics builds upon it. So the regulations must ensure that the systems are safe, they're transparent, they align with ethical principles, uh, and like accountability. Developers and innovators have to embrace frameworks that address these concerns rather than viewing them as obstacles. If you would like my preferred way to look at regulations around this, it would be to provide them as frameworks and best practices. But unfortunately, in the race to get things to market, we oftentimes overlook best practices. we overlook the frameworks that are there. So you have to take a regulatory approach. Sometimes the big stick is necessary. Uh, you need to foster innovation-friendly policies. You know, and governments really can incentivize innovation by creating flexible guidelines that adapt to these emerging technologies. Oftentimes, the technology, the innovations are ahead of the government, and that's why you need to create these flexible guidelines that can really adapt and kind of tell you where you're headed before you can spell out some of the details. And how do you differentiate between the risks? Um, I personally believe that regulations should be should be really proportional to the potential harm by the AI use. And we're seeing that in some things. For example, uh, high stake domains like healthcare, autonomous vehicles, and others require more strict controls in low risk areas like entertainment. And just looking in the United States, we see HIPAA and we see high trust, which is a lot more restrictive than even HIPAA, being used here to put guidelines in place where you don't see those in many of these other industries. Um, so really being proportional to those risks is a very important part of this. Um, Dr. Strick, I'm always about group intelligence and collaboration. And it really works here too in your question on this one. So the policymakers, the government, the regulators, the researchers, the academicians, the corporate leaders must work together to ensure that regulations are informed and that they fit the industries, that they're nuanced, because it's going to be very difficult with AI to have one size fits all. And once again, because AI is a global technology, these have to be implemented on a global scale. And again, going back to transparency and accountability, uh, you you have to, within a regulatory sense, ensure that you have transparency and that you have accountability. But we've seen that here in the United States, where basic laws that are on the books, when they're not enforced, they cease to be effective laws. You're going to have the same thing with artificial intelligence. When you put these regulations in place, when you put these frameworks in place, if there's no enforcement, you might as well not have them in place to begin with. So that's my thoughts, Dr. Shreve.
Thank you, Madam Ali Rice. What's your advice for women entrepreneurs, those who develop new AI?
I think that it needs to stem from some kind of purpose. So for me, AI, I think that it's not about it doing something for you, but assisting you so that it enhances what you'd already do. So essentially, I think that they need to kind of figure out where the problems are and provide solutions using AI. And I think if it's saving time, so that there's more efficiency, that's great. But if it's doing the work for you, one of the research things I loved actually that I found is that I think, let me just find it quick in my notes, that that basically there was an AI assistant that was working with the user, and apparently the user asked the assistant to do more code, and the AI assistant turned around and said it couldn't generate any more code for them, as that would be completing their work for them, and doing so could lead to dependency and reduce learning opportunity. So I think that's really key to me. That there's people that I know that are my son's friends that that are doing kind of advanced maths, and they get AI to do the whole thing for them because it's too hard. And I think the thing is that then you're kind of going to come unstuck when you do your exams, and So I think it's it needs to be a balance. But I think the thing is that it's pointless if it's obviously if someone's not creative and they need an image, it's great you can access something, and coming back to that access and for everybody, it's great that someone can generate an image and use it to promote something. So yes, it's really amazing, but I think it is about that kind of ethic and kind of moral kind of outlook as to why you do it and what it achieves. So yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Rob, what responsibilities do tech companies and investors share in mitigating AI-driven bias and algorithmic discrimination?
Well, and this goes back to quality. It goes back to what responsibility do tech companies, investors share in assuring the quality of their product. And when we're talking about AI-driven biases and algorithmic discrimination, those are quality problems. Those are quality problems. And so investors typically don't like to invest in companies that create low quality products. And to be fair, return on investment for a company that's producing low quality products, particularly in this area, could be problematic because once AI is making decisions, if those decisions turn out to be an error because of low quality, then that company is likely to be sued, and particularly a small company, that litigation could consume the company's assets, and as an investor, you'll be SOL. So and of course, with regard to the company itself, building low quality products isn't exactly a path to financial success, and so if we define quality as including those aspects, and I think we should, because with any product, it has to be performant in the market that it's targeting. And if the algorithms are bad, or if it's got inherent bias, that means its decisions are bad. That means the quality is unacceptable in the chosen market, and will undoubtedly fail in market against either stronger products or because it's litigated out of existence for the damage it does. And so, in both cases, assuring the quality of the product is the responsibility of the company and those within it that are building the offering. But investors have an inherent goal to assure the company survives and the product is successful. And so, while they don't have a lot of control over the quality of the product, they do have control over their investment. And were it me, I wouldn't be investing in companies that are doing things like getting rid of quality control. You're muted.
Mr. David, how can ethical AI contribute to the long-term financial return, and is there a business case for responsible AI investment?
The We've been answering parts of this question throughout the whole thing. So you begin to look at how ethical AI is not just a moral imperative, though. If you talk about the frameworks and the qualities, and Rob's last comment about even investing in a company, it's a smart business strategy. Companies, investors who prioritize ethical AI practices can potentially unlock significant long-term financial benefit while they're building a sustainable and trustworthy brand. And part of the key word in that answer is the brand there. And you need to have it because the business case for doing this is fairly strong. And the places it comes back and bites you, like you see, Rob and I both have the exact same reaction to what OpenAI is doing. It's hurting them. I mean, it's causing me to decrease my use of it. And other people I know are beginning to run away from part of it because of some of these restrictions. It hurts the case there. So you need to really look, how do you enhance that trust? How do you enhance that reputation? And ethical AI practices foster trust among consumers, among the government, among the employees, among the stakeholders. I mean, I was happy to hear Rob say when that happened at IBM, he resigned. You're going to see that. I've seen a number of people resign over things that were not ethical software practices. So companies need to be known to be fair and transparent. And what's interesting about that also is they tend to experience greater customer loyalty and greater brand equality going long term. You also see this with risk mitigation. Uh, investing in ethical AI reduces the risk of lawsuits. It reduces the risk of penalties from the governments and regulatory uh, bodies, and it potentially reduces your reputation damage if biases or harmful algorithms do work themselves in that aren't caught. And being proactive ensures compliance with existing and future regulations, which minimize financial and operational disruptions. And I want to emphasize that putting regulations in place isn't fast. You can see the trends, you can see the lead lag relationships pretty early. So proactively beginning to adapt to these and establish yourself as a market leader in this is probably a good thing today. Also, it helps you uh, get access to new markets because this will help you create designs that work with new market segments and new demographics. You know, is happening there. We know that one of the AI companies that we've actually picked on today, their early models of their products, particularly version 2, uh, had no representation from Asia. So that was a demographic that was ignored during part of their processes there. And the other thing that I think companies really forget about is that if you put responsible AI practices in, ethical AI, moral AI, whatever you want to call it, it it distinguishes your business in a crowded marketplace, and it gives you a competitive advantage. It gives you an advantage in recruiting employees and investors and others, and it can drive your adoption. And it lets you, by putting that in play, it lets you show that you're a more innovative company in many ways because your companies that are leaders in this area are forced to think creatively on how to overcome these biases, how to overcome the different design choices, how to maintain transparency, but yet how to also protect the intellectual property of the company and organization. And this this type of innovation, keeping that in mind, can lead to entirely new business models, to new products, new services, and you begin to see that. So really, by aligning your financial goals, your business goals, your business processes with ethical AI principles, uh, you can minimize risk and you can create value for the stakeholders. And I think that is really necessary today, Dr. Sharif, as we are on this hyper growth period of the AI tools we're seeing today. And how speed to market is critical, but you've got to do it right. So, Dr. Sharif, thank you.
Thank you. My next question for Madam Ali Rice: how do we empower a new generations of AI talent that prioritize ethics, diversity, and social good alongside innovation?
Okay, because I would say from my experience of the new generation that that I would say that they'd probably come in with some kind of conscience about what they did and how they did it. So yeah, so and I think this generation is much more equipped to deal with AI and kind of be more knowledgeable about it. So for me, I think a lot of the AI that I actually utilize is kind of incidental, really. So I don't go out of my way to utilize it. So yeah, and I just think, I guess if sat navs are AI, then that's one of the few things that everybody relies on. But I still would argue that it's really good to have navigational skills just in case for whatever reason it doesn't work. So I think the thing is that I don't think it should replace skills, but it definitely helps and eases your ability to get somewhere. So I think so that's the thing is that let me just make sure that I've answered that. How's the new generation? Because I definitely think there's an old adage that every time people leave school, and my daughter's going to leave school in the next few years and go to uni or go over to the workforce, that essentially there's lots of jobs that don't even exist now that will exist, particularly in technology and and the ramifications of AI. So yeah, so I think the thing is that there's lots of boundaries to break. And so my question is really whether there are kind of ethical frameworks and regulation already, because from what I see, there isn't until there's a problem, and then everyone kind of jumps on it, and then they have to kind of show this. But I think so much has been developed that I don't know how much regulation there really is, because I think for the general layman in the street that doesn't necessarily use technology, that people don't tend to question things until they go wrong. So yeah, so for me, so I think there's lots of question marks over how much regulation there is on any of it. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. So my next question for Mr. Rob: how can investor evaluate whether a AI startup or project genuinely incorporate ethical principle rather than just using them for branding and compliance?
Well, um, that you're asking an investor to figure out whether the public statements from the company are consistent with their internal operations, and there you got a problem. Typically an investor isn't allowed to audit the company they're investing in, and this is, I mean, it would be different if you were buying the company. Because any prudent buyer would then look underneath the covers and see if the practices the company was showcasing were consistent with values that they had advertised, and do understand that there's a long history of companies putting forth a set of concepts publicly and then completely ignoring them privately, either on an individual basis with executives misacting or as a corporate basis with the entire company misacting underneath the covers. Here's a case where you kind of have to watch the company perform over time. And certainly look at the public statements that any of the executives have been making over time, to see if they're consistent with the ethical values that you hold for the firm. Using the example of OpenAI, they have spoken to ethics, certainly in the past and positively, but they got rid of a lot of their ethical core because they thought it was slowing down development, and the people that were screaming and yelling inside the company that the company needed to do more to create a higher quality offering, or one that at least was not significantly biased and problematic. Those people were let go, and so that showcases that regardless of how OpenAI talks about ethics, they aren't practicing what they preach, and that's a problem. But your average investor, in most cases, particularly if the company is careful about their public posts, is going to have trouble finding the evidence they need. In some cases, it's going to be out there. A lot of times people, before they get a job, are much more outspoken about their beliefs than they are after they get a job. You see that a lot in politics as well. So maybe looking at the history of the people that are directing the company, what they're posting about, any litigation surrounding the company, particularly the company and its employees. You're looking for behavior that is either in support of or contrary to the ethical values that you hold, and if you see enough evidence that the people that are working in the company do not hold your ethical values, there's a good chance that's made it into the product. We've had, certainly looking back at misogyny, you can often go back when you've had a significant problem inside the company with regard to abuse, and see that the company, the leadership in the company, has been anything but circumspect in their views about how some of the DEI programs or programs that are designed to protect women and minorities are not according to their way of looking at the world. And so there is a way to determine it. I'm just, unless you're really a large scale investor, and so instead of a small investor. So for instance, in the US, one of the biggest investors is the California Teachers Union. And they actually do a pretty good job of looking within, at least they did, looking within the companies to see if the ethics followed their guidelines. And so you can look at major investors like this and see where they're investing, and then dovetail on their investment practices. I'm a little cautious in saying this because some of these organizations aren't all that consistent about doing their homework, but it's a better guideline if you see investors pulling back from a product. For instance, there are a lot of investors just completely abandoning Tesla at the moment. That would be an indication that there are some underlying problems, and at the very least, if major investors are pulling away from a company, you recognize they're going to have a capital problems going forward, regardless of their behavior, and it might not be a good place to park your money as a result. So there are both ethical reasons to avoid companies where large investors that have showcased ethical investing in the past have abandoned them, as well as pertinent reasons with regard to their ethics. So I'd say that's probably the best indicator. Look at who's investing in the company, and if the people investing in the company have showcased a focus on ethics. The larger companies, the ones that can actually do this level of research, are not investing in this company, then it'd be an indicator or a problem. And if they are investing in the company, at least it would give you another clue, another piece of evidence that the company may perform according to your ethical values, assuming that the investor that you're dovetailing on, that you're following, also holds your ethical values.
Thank you. My next question for Mr. David. What framework or standard can guide organizations to ensure AI technology do not perpetuate bias, discriminations, or social inequalities, especially in underrepresented regions like Global South?
Well, there's, Dr. Sharif, a fair amount of emerging frameworks, emerging guidelines, which are there. We're seeing them implemented by government bodies around the world. You saw Europe begin to take the lead with GDPR. Now there's E5 out of EU that's beginning to build it more. You're seeing countries there as well as the EU not be able to go and do that and work that way. The frameworks that are coming in place here in the United States are encouraging. There's been a setback in some of the regulatory approaches here because of changes in the government structure here after the last election. But I think the industry groups are still trying to begin to perceive one way and how that's going to work versus some of the other approaches. So I see the frameworks beginning to develop here, but it's going to take a little bit more time for it to work its way out.
Thank you. Madam Ali Rice, how can inclusive innovations be achieved in AI development when the majority of data and technological infrastructure are controlled by a few global tech giants?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, because I think one of the things that I'd looked at, one of the concerns was the algorithmic decision making and the data mining and stuff like that. So there's kind of correlation between, like the data sets and how the information's brought up anyway. And I also think, I think it's if there's some kind of autonomy as well, so that people get their own input and can, so there's nuances to what the AI does, so that it's very specified on what you're looking for. It makes it easier than than having some random kind of unspecific kind of generated data or image, or so I just think, for me, I would say that if you're using AI, it needs to be very specific for a specific purpose. So yeah, so I think and because I don't understand all of the how it all puts it together, but it's very clever. So but I just think that it needs to be based on
Hey,
experience.
I'm still on this other program, so you don't have any time at all?
Sorry. Oh, sorry.
David, you're not muted.
Oh, sorry. So yeah. But no, it's a good question because I think DeepSeek's one of the few AIs that isn't controlled by a massive, great big global corporation, isn't it? And everything else, and it's also it's got bias of its own kind of inbuilt as well. So I guess the way they're put together, there's always going to be bias.
Thank you. Uh, Mr. Rob, what role should government and multilateral institution play in incentivizing ethical AI investment, especially in developing countries?
Well, okay, so incentives. I think you probably should, like anything else, governments incent development. And with those incentives should come requirements. And part of those requirements should be some measure of ethical conformance. The issue we've got right now with government bodies is they lack the competency to regulate anything that's on the cutting edge. This was true of the internet. I can still remember in our own congressional hearings, somebody talking about it in terms of tubes and pipes. It was, and you would think that might be a good analogy, but it turned out not to be. So the result is often you've got to build up a competency in an area before you can understand how to regulate it. Otherwise, it's like taking a buzz saw to a hospital. You're not going to be a great surgeon. And you may end up doing more damage than good. And so the first step is really building up an AI, building up a competency in the technology that you're intending to regulate, and then with that competency, look at the concept of minimum necessary change. What is the least you can do to get the outcome that you want? Because if you don't do that, you get a lot of unintended consequences that can be very damaging, and a lot of collateral damage that could be avoided could have been avoided if the people putting in place the regulations understood what it was they were doing. And so an example of this, for instance, is when President Obama decided he was going to allow the government to invest in solar panels, and they invested in a company that had a very unique idea in terms of how you could harvest solar energy much more effectively by capturing energy on all aspects of the panel, and it looked really good. But to get to critical mass, somebody had to buy this thing in volume to get the cost down because the cost was out of line. And so while the government invested and provided incentives, at the back end, it didn't purchase this technology. It didn't help build a market for this technology. And the company and the investment failed. And it kind of goes back to this. Well, they tried to look like a good idea on paper, but they didn't really think it through and assure that the milestones and goals that were in place for that investment included the success of the operators. And so just throwing money at this thing isn't going to do anybody any good. You really have to think through the economics of it, assure the company that's being funded will be successful, and do what it takes to make sure that happens. And with regard to ethical guidelines and guidance, probably assure the education system is providing ethical training as a requirement for people that are coming up in terms of training AI and robotics, and also ensure that there's a certain amount of compliance, and perhaps you might even have a certification program where people working on this, much like doctors have to be certified and go through a set of tests and training, that maybe the same thing needs to happen for the people that are working on AI to assure the quality of the outcome. So that means not just throwing money at it, but making sure the education system's properly focused on creating what it is you want to create, and then the people that are working on the program have some type of certification or assured training that has them focused on ethics. And then finally, you do need to have some type of a review program. We have, for aircraft, for instance, we have the FAA that's supposed to go in and take a look at how these things are being built and to assure that they're being built properly. Though often, as we've found in the past, we found that the FAA said, okay, you can self-certify, and suddenly we've got doors flying off of airplanes in flight. And so that certification program has to have teeth. It can't be backed off. And I don't believe in self-certification without some type of an audit program to assure the self-certification is performant. So assuring a comprehensive program that yes, helps fund the AI development, but assures that ethics are being trained in the people that are working on it, assures the people working on it have to pass some type of certification, so they're not just going to the classes and not learning anything from them, or auditing the classes and using cliff notes to pass the test. That they actually grasp the importance of these ethical guidelines, and then a back end process that takes a look at what's been created and make sure that it meets the quality guidelines, much like we do with automobiles, aircraft, and anything else that could have an adverse impact on human life. A program that is adequate to the task of assuring the quality of the outcome, and that's how you do it. It does need to be comprehensive. It does not only need to fund, but assure the success of the entities that you create, and also in terms of quality, assure that the quality elements, in this case, ethical behavior, are trained into the people that are creating this thing, and that their certifications are both initially put in place and probably need to be updated. I know in auditing and finance, we do require people to go back and get certified on a regular basis. That might be important here as well, because over time people might lose the influence of that initial training and start screwing up and making the determination, like I pointed out in my IBM example, that maybe these quality efforts are detrimental to revenue, and maybe we need to get rid of them. Or in this case, the ethical conformance efforts are antithetical to revenue and need to be discontinued. And you need to assure that that doesn't happen. So it would need to be a comprehensive program that looks at AI, looks at the AI holistically, and addresses all aspects of its development, assuring ethical behavior throughout.
Thank you, Mr. David Smith. My next questions and final question for you: how can we design and implement AI governance systems that are adaptive, transparent, and inclusive while still enabling rapid innovation and scalability?
Uh, what we have to do is we have to put in place uh, a system that really looks at the next generation in a way that empowers each of the different stakeholders, each of the different parts of the Technopolis to begin to work there. And oftentimes today, when we look at innovation, we very often leave the process part out, the governance out, the regulatory compliance out. We need to change the model to make sure that is part of it, and part of a transformational type of system that requires really a combination of education. And it's education of all the stakeholders, not just the developers. It requires mentorship. It requires the industry to rebalance some of its objectives as it looks at innovation and advancement. And we have to look at ways to incentivize community engagement. Uh, it's very difficult today to provide feedback actually to the different AI tools and things we use when we see things that we question and that we want to bring to their attention or address or flag. And we need to look at ways to incentivize that type of community engagement. So just a couple of remarks on this. We need to transform our education. Universities, institutions, boot camps, corporate training, others, we have to incorporate these type of ethical principles into our AI courses, into our engineering courses, into our business strategy courses. It's not just the engineering side, it has to be in the business skills, it has to be in the others as well, alongside the technical skills. And part of this is we need to help all of those stakeholders analyze real world examples, real world cases of places where the AI systems have been biased, where the ethical AI has not been met, and what are the ramifications for it. We need to look at how to take these types of ethical AI ethics and look at them cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary. Because if I look at where AI is today in their tools, it impacts not just technology, not just business. It includes psychology, sociology, philosophy, law, uh, many other areas that need to be part of this discussion and need to have a voice, but they also need to understand what's going on with ethical AI and do that. We have to look at ways to provide financial assistance to get these done and how to do those community centric workshops. Yeah, I was amazed in looking at some of the expos that there's now ads being put in place to teach people older than 50 years old what AI is. Well, you need to teach people 20 years old what AI is. And it's a continuous learning process. And we need to understand that many people in the non-technology advanced environments in society don't understand what AI is and do not understand the approaches. So their view of AI is what they've seen in movies or in television series. I mean, I had someone look at the latest robot out of Elon Musk and say, "Oh, that's like the Rosie the maid in the Jetsons." And if you think about that one had a lot of AI and stuff too. But that is how most people in the world today perceive AI. So we've got to see how can we communicate not just the people responsible for producing it, but the people who are using it too. And how do we put corporate accountability in place? How do we put government accountability in place? Uh, and how do we promote AI that meets these ethical standards, to meet these ethical initiatives we want to do? And finally, last point on this one, it has to be a global collaboration. So we have to facilitate partnerships between, at least initially, against between the different tech hubs in the countries, the developed countries and the emerging economies, for mutual exchange and innovation. But we also have to build it at the government levels. We have to build it in the ways we look at how we teach people to do it. We need to build some shared platforms. What I saw in the early days of what we did before it was called AI with some of the data science and things, and what we're beginning to do with quantum computing is we need to build global repositories of open source tools, open source data sets, and other things to begin to understand this. There are now the beginning to be some synthetic data sets that we can use as we develop things which meet the lack of bias, that meet the ethical or moral AI. But these open source tools need to continue to be developed so that we have the ability to test and things without the huge cost of doing everything from scratch. So, Dr. Sharif, that's my concluding remarks.
Thank you. This is excellent discussions. Especially, I think it will be very thought provoking for the corporations and the government agency for Bangladesh or for South Asia or for Asia Pacific. Thank you, Madam Ali Rice, Mr. Rob Enderley, and Mr. David Smith for your excellent contribution for today's sessions. And I see that our audience also interest about this kind of dialogues. Beside that, we are publishing our research papers uh, like artificial intelligence strategical implications through the talent economy. So I think that I send like invitations for chapters. So it will be more advanced, like your corporation, how you apply AI or talent economy strategies. You can write and you can submit. It will be published in IGI Global, and it's very impactful journal. So all of your contributions will be helpful for develop a knowledge-oriented society. Your innovations, your research, your dialogues will be very, very fruitful for emerging economy. Besides that, in between 1 month, we are launching a very exclusive programs like urban planning for Rajbari. And around 100 million people in Bangladesh, they will be benefited through our urban planning and this kind of conference. So all of your collaborations and partnership will be helpful for us. That is the way we are uplifting. Our dialogue is not only dialogue, we are taking actions. We are engaging with the people, we are developing research center, we are train the new communities, and we are taking actions to improve the human life. So all of your contributions, Mr. David Smith, your company's contribution, Mr. Rob, your knowledge oriented contributions, Madam Ali Rice, your contribution is priceless. So I request all of our audience, please share our content as much as possible with the government agency, corporation, and academia. Thank you. Bye bye and take care.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.